Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, tonight I have the distinct pleasure of speaking to Deputy Scott Brown from the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, live and direct right here in the Saloon. Today is Tuesday. It's March 15th, the year of our Lord 2022. Broadcasting live from the SHR Media studios. Tonight, we're going to forego any breaks except for the occasional SHR Media notifier. And basically what's going to happen is we're going to continue until we're done. Now, if that takes 15 minutes or a half hour or an hour or 2 hours, we'll stop when Scott Brown is satisfied that his tale is told. So for tonight, Scott Brown is the co-author of the book Facing Evil, published in late 2021, and that's available at Amazon in either paperback or Kindle. So we are tonight going to be speaking to Deputy Scott Brown because he has a harrowing story to tell. Experienced first person, which includes every violent situation you could possibly think of or imagine. Every worst case scenario you could envision for a law enforcement officer. Every trauma, every piece of guilt, every horror, every nightmare compacted into a few seconds. And then strewn out in what I call the nightly brain theater for now, almost all these 8 years. So, Scott Brown, welcome, and thank you for being here tonight, sir.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you, having me on the show to share this story and talk to your listeners.
We were talking earlier, and I showed you, and this is for the people that listen to the show. It should not shock anybody that I have 14 pages of questions, because that's how I roll, essentially. But I want to tell everybody up front, I haven't really had a show like this on. I spoke to a gentleman about a year ago named Gary Bush, and he got into it. He's down in Southern California. He was a Southern California law enforcement officer, and he went through a shooting, had him on the show, and since then I haven't really dealt in issues like this because for me, they're a little personal. But for those who are listening, I want to tell you seriously, there's a warning. If you're not, because of the temper of the times and whatnot, if you're not in the frame of mind for a presentation like this, particularly, as I say, in light of the horror show that this nation and the rest of the world has become, stop right here. And I'm not kidding. Because like life, though, the pain of this show is up front. So you'll have to endure some discomfort to get to the end, to get to the point of it all. And trust me, there is a point. And there are several, actually. This is the story of one law enforcement officer and a host of other law enforcement officers and civilians around them who came across the embodiment of evil in the personage of one man. I won't detail him here. Scott Brown, I'm going to do my very best tonight not to name him, because I don't think it's not about him.
Yeah, we do the same thing at our house. We either refer to him as, my wife calls him the evildoer. I got a whole bunch of names for him, but none of them include his actual name. I
should imagine. But what actually happened is that this one man, on October 24th of 2014, murdered Sacramento County Sheriff's Deputy Danny Oliver and then drove to a neighboring county where he shot and killed Placer County Deputy Sheriff Detective Michael Davis and wounded a third officer, and he ended up seriously wounding an uninvolved citizen nearby. So, as I said last week in promoting the show, Scott Brown didn't set out to be an author, but today, now he is.
Oh, I'm probably the most unlikely author you would ever want to meet.
Didn't set out to do this.
Not at all.
And yet, here you are. And so, again, I say thank you very kindly for being here tonight. I greatly appreciate it. Because I have a plan, and it's pretty simple. I'd like to just kind of start at the start. And, damn, I wish my video were working. The internet is not powerful enough to keep the video going, but it's only audio. But I actually have a copy of your book. I've got a couple of bookmarks here, and I would highly recommend that if you like what you've heard tonight, you can find the book, which is called Facing Evil. It's on Amazon in paperback. I have a paperback version, and it's on Kindle. And Scott Brown, can you think of any place else that it is?
Oh yeah,
available?
So my wife and I actually have a webpage that has links to all the media we've done.
Let's talk about that. What is that? Because I should have asked you that.
That's okay. It's scottandlizbrown.com. Just no spaces, SCOTT, AND, or Scott, Scott and Liz, So SCOTTANDLIZBROWN.com, and it has links to our bios, all the media that we have done, a couple other interviews, some podcasts, that kind of thing. There's actually a 45-minute video from a conference that we attended of my wife and I speaking. And then there's a link to the Amazon through there as well, along with the Danny Oliver Foundation link, How to Love Our Cops, which my wife is a part of, and then the Spouses Association, which she started. And then there's a link on the Danny Oliver page as well to buy the book. That's actually where I recommend get it, because they actually get some of the proceeds if you buy it from the Danny Oliver page.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you. Good to know. Tonight, like I say, I just want to start at the start, ask some questions along the way, guide if I can, and if you take it away and run with the ball, oh well, so be it, because it's your story to tell, and I'm just here to kind of set the stage. And as far as I'm concerned, the lessons involved tonight in your incident are life's largest. So with luck, I went, as I indicated to you earlier before we started the show, I went to every officer Facebook page that I could envision to try to see if I could get as many people to listen to the show possible. And I want to make sure that it's accessible to everybody listening. So because a number of the people that listen to my show are not officers, I will try my very level best to reduce the jargon so that people understand the thrust of what it is that we're saying. So the people, if nothing else, people can understand the nature of true evil. I did a show probably about 3 months now ago where I had 3 pastors on and a former pastor and an individual locally that I wanted to get on that brushed me off, that I was very disappointed in. And we just talked about the nature of evil. And for those who don't believe that evil exists, evil exists.
It does. And that's kind of how we came up with the title for it as well, is because even before we came up with the book idea, we always refer to him as just, I mean, the guy is just evil. And I'm coming up on, in another month or so, my 20-year mark with the department. And I mean, I've, worked a lot of areas, worked a lot of jobs, I've arrested a lot of people, and done quite a lot of, quite a few things. And during that time, I can honestly say that of the people that I've arrested, of the things that I've done, very few of them I would consider evil, right? There's idiots. There's people that do dumb stuff.
Oh, yes.
There's people that are in a bad way, right? There's people that make bad decisions. There's people that do evil things. But I believe that, I'm an optimist a little bit, that I believe that they didn't get there on their own, and that they can probably, change a little bit if the right circumstances applied themselves. With him, I don't believe that. I believe that man is evil, and that's what he has in his heart, and that's what he will continue to have in his heart until the day that he dies. And I believe that day, it was one of the few times in my career that I came across somebody that is just genuinely evil.
My mother-in-law, before she passed away of pancreatic cancer, in 3 months, right after I met her, said, gave to me a sentence that I remember to this day. And she said, treat my wife well. And the other thing she said was, sometimes people are put on this planet simply to be illustrations of what not to do.
Yep. I think that's very accurate.
And I think we're going to try to be as kind as we can tonight. But in totality, at the conclusion of the show, I think everyone here will have a very good inkling as to what the nature of evil is and what it looks like, the true nature of humanity, which, by the way, can prevail over evil, because ultimately, in my opinion, this whole story is a story of good triumphing over evil. And as I'm going to say at the end, throughout this entire book, Scott Brown, there were 5 sentences which may or may not surprise you, which summarized to me this entire book. And that's eventually where I want to go and what I want to end with. Now, that said, Scott Brown, if you can tell us just a little bit about yourself, your background, your education, what made you want to become a member of law enforcement in California?
Well, it's actually kind of a, I guess, funny story. There's those guys out there that wanted to be cops since they were, basically conceived, right? That's all they ever wanted to do, or it was a family thing, right? They had a dad or somebody in law enforcement.
Exactly.
I did not have that. I didn't come from that, and that wasn't a thought in my head. I was raised around here, student athlete kind of thing, got a scholarship to go play football at Sac State, went to Sac State and got my degree in psychology, played football there, finished up, and had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I was bartending at Applebee's and with a degree and totally clueless. That's when, Sac State's a big criminal justice program. A couple of my football buddies were, I was hanging out with them at one night, and they're, hey, have you ever thought about, law enforcement, becoming a cop? I told them that it hadn't even dawned on me. And they were, a couple of them were in the academy at the time, and they started, preaching it up, right? Hey, you get to drive fast, carry a gun, wrestle, fight, blah, 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 all this good stuff. And I'm like, well, hell, I love all that stuff.
Yeah, why not?
And, lo and behold, I did absolutely no research whatsoever, I'll be honest. Didn't look into various departments, didn't see which one had a better rep or anything like that. Just randomly somehow fell it, because I think that's where they were going. All right, I'll try, fill out an application for the sheriff's department.
Okay, so this is interesting. Now, you didn't try Sac PD or anybody else first?
Nope.
Really?
Nope.
Didn't
try
know that.
Didn't try a single one. I didn't even know which one I didn't know they had more than one academy. I didn't know they had a day one affiliated day one and then an extended night one. I didn't know they even had 2. When I filled it out, apparently I was filling it out for the extended night academy, which I didn't know.
Well, you found out, though.
I found out because that's the one I got into. I filled out the application, and I guess they were, desperate or something, because I went in, and in the course of about 2 weeks, I did the physical, the written, and the oral, all in 2 weeks' time. And about 3 weeks after that, I was sitting in a classroom because I think they were trying to fill bodies. I don't know. Desperate beats me. But once I was in, I was still finishing up, I think, one last class for my degree. And I was in there, and my mom, it was funny, my mom was the one that said, I think you've found what you need, what you're going to be doing. I'm all, why is that? She's all, because you're studying on purpose. Because I was that one that,
large clue.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, my brother and sister are very studious, very smart, all A's kind of thing. I got mostly B's, and that was mostly at the pushing and prodding of my parents, keeping me, active in what I needed to do.
Yep.
And I was actually doing it on purpose, right? I wanted to do well. I was, and I loved it. I some people didn't like the academy. I thought it was awesome. I just finished college sports. I was in shape. I was still in the studying mode. I thought the academics were fairly easy for the most part. Like I said, the running, the jumping, shooting, I'd been doing all that stuff my whole life. Ended up near the top half academically. I think it was like top 12 or something like that. I was the top gun in my class, so I shot better than everybody else. I don't know what that says about my class. But
when was your class? What year was that?
I graduated in 2002. So I started in 2001 and ended in 2002.
Okay. Were you Do you remember me at the academy at
Yes.
the graduation? Was I range master?
Yes, I believe you were.
Okay. Did I hand you a certificate?
I
If
had
you
a
got
certificate. and
if
a
you got
plaque.
Top Gun,
Yeah.
that's bizarre. I very well may have given that out to you.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's a little bizarre.
Yeah. And so I did that and finished up, and took me about, they were doing our patrol first, where you go straight from the academy out to the street while you're still on probation, so they can fire you if you don't pass. Went straight from, growing up in Fair Oaks to in a patrol car in South Sac. Made me realize that I learned absolutely nothing in the academy. It was you learn the basics and you think you know everything, and then as soon as you're sitting in a car, you realize I don't know nothing, right? First call out of the gate was it was a rape call. I think it was a 12-year-old raped like a 6-year-old, and then went straight from there to a double homicide. And I remember going home from my first day of training and like, what the hell is going on, right?
What did I get myself into?
Yeah, and then, obviously I stuck with it because 20 years later, here I am. And, typical assignments, did pass my patrol first, obviously.
Right.
Went to the jail, did about 3.5 there, my first stint. Became a jail training officer, CERT team, did part of the gang intel thing, just keep them busy, right? Taking any class they'll give me.
Right.
Rotated out to patrol, did about roughly 4 years out there. And then the budget of 2009, everything went to crap.
Oh, that's right. You went through that.
I did, pear-shaped. And so
oh, my God.
when that happened, I was rotated back to the jail for 1.5 years, which sucked. But I couldn't complain, right? People are getting fired, so I kept my mouth shut and head down. And
for those who don't know, the Sacramento Sheriff's Department is in the capital of California, which is Sacramento. Most people know that have been listening to the show. What you may not know is that in 2008, when the crash occurred, Sacramento County had to let go, I'm trying to remember, anywhere between 180 to close to 200 deputies.
It was 100, I believe it was in the 170 range was what.
And it was the most recent hired were the first fired. So the brand new kids that we just gotten on the department, we're not talking 5 or 10. We're talking almost multiple hundreds.
And from what I understand, most of them eventually over a time span were able to get hired back. The ones that didn't end up going to other agencies,
right.
That kind of thing. So I did 1.5 years in the jail, kept busy again, came back out to patrol. Did all my patrol time was on graveyards, which was 10 at night till 8 in the morning.
Right.
And I loved it. Not as many admin out. It was dark, and anybody out doing anything after 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night on a weekday is probably doing something wrong. So.
And you got to dig.
And I got to dig and chase, and nobody called it off kind of thing.
Yep. Self-initiated activity.
Yep.
Loved it.
Yep. And that was my thing, man. I love doing proactive stuff, stops and all that thing. Became a field training officer out there on Graveyard. That's where I met Danny and a whole crew that we all worked together, became good friends. And then he ended up, he was the one that convinced me to go to the POP team, which is our problem-oriented policing team. When people ask me what that is, I say, for us, it's the Swiss Army knife of the department. We did a little bit of everything. We would be extra bodies for our SWAT team, for detectives if they were hitting a house. We would do community events where we would do barbecues. We did our own undercover stuff. We did John stings and rub and tugs and some buy-bust, stuff like that. We would do high-impact sweeps. Our 6-man team, when I was on it, was averaging anywhere from 50 to 70 felony arrests a month.
And so
now that was back when things were still felonies in California.
Right. Well, that's a story unto itself.
Yeah.
When you were doing that, though, your POP team was in the north area, or were there a couple of POP teams? Were you north or you were south? I don't recall.
I was north. Yeah,
You
there
were
was
north, okay.
there was our 6-man team was north, and then they had 2 transient enforcement detail guys that we worked with occasionally, and then south had their own POP team. I want to say it was smaller though. It was like a 3 or 4-man team with no homeless team. The homeless guys kind of went everywhere.
So the cool thing about all that, folks, is you have a small unit, an intimate unit where everybody knows each other. You get to the point where you know how each individual is going to react in a given situation, and they become not just good people to work with, they become your friends.
Yeah, I mean, we were friends before I joined that team. There was a group of us. We'd go to Reno together and go have a good time. And we went, that kind of thing. And then once we started partnering up, I mean, we were with the same person for 12 hours a day.
Yep.
Your safety, your life is in that person's hands, right? I mean, they're literally, when they're pointing one direction, you're pointing the other one to make sure that nothing happens to them, kind of thing. I helped them move. I helped them. We went on vacations together. We were, my kids called him Uncle Danny. Our wives were friends, that kind of stuff. And we really got to know each other very well. I mean, during those John stings where we're doing our stuff and we're on surveillance. I mean, you're sitting in a van with a guy for 16 hours. You're going to talk about just about everything.
You got to talk about something.
Yeah. And I know a lot of guys don't usually get personal, but when you're with somebody that long, you learn about family. You learn about what they're worried about and that kind of thing. So you get to know them pretty well.
Folks, we're talking tonight to Deputy Scott Brown of the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, and he has co-written or written a book entitled Facing Evil. And it's the story of the on-duty murder of his partner, Danny Oliver, and the subsequent murder of Placer County Sheriff's Detective Michael Davis. And you can find Brown's book, Facing Evil, on Amazon in paperback or on Kindle. So, Scott Brown, your assignment on that one particular day, October 24th of 2014, was in POP, Problem-Oriented Policing. You told us what that was, and on that day, October 24th, what were you guys doing? When did you start your shift?
So that particular day actually started a little early because the night before we got in a call from parole asking for our help. They wanted to go to a house that one of their probation officers had gone there for a probation check and had gotten basically forced out by the homeowners, and they wanted extra bodies because they were going to go violate this person's probation. And it was not a nice neighborhood. It was one where you don't go to unless you got a couple cars and a couple people kind of thing. And so we went there with them, and we got there early. I think it was 6 that morning. Got all posseed up, got our gear ready, went over and met the probation agents over off of Orange Grove. Talked with them, went to the house. Got the door in and went in and arrested the probationer. Ended up taking her to jail. They needed somebody to transport. So we said, we'll transport, because I had a warrant to drop off for some meth that we'd gotten off a guy earlier, but he had to let him go for medical reasons. So I volunteered because it's down by the DA's office, and, 2 birds, 1 stone kind of thing.
Why not?
So we transported her down there. While we were there, got a call from the people on scene. Hey, can you ad book her for animal cruelty? Because there were some dogs in the back, some pitties that were just emaciated and, obviously not treated well. So we ad booked her for that, added some charges, talked with the booking crew for a while, and then we took off, went to the DA's office. And one of the many things I kicked myself for later, not that you can do anything about it because I didn't have 20/20 vision at that time, right? I didn't know the future. But instead of walking it through, which means you go through the entire process, these are for the people who don't know, you wait for the DA to sign off it, then you walk across the street to the judge, you get him to sign it, then you go downstairs, get it put in the system. The whole thing would take a couple hours at least, right? They said, you want to drop it off or you want to walk it through? If you drop it off, they call you when it's ready, and you go down whenever you feel like it later, and you kind of do it in piecemeal basis. I'm like, we'll just drop it off. We want to go do other stuff, right? So we dropped it off and headed out. And on our way back, we're heading down, and we're going business 80 through Sacramento, and we're coming up on Arden Way, and I remember Danny looking at me and saying, all he said was Motel 6, and I said, yeah. Well, it's not even there anymore, but the Motel 6 at Ethan and Arden was a shithole.
Oh, yeah, it was a dump.
Yeah, it always had been, and it was one of those places we'd been to multiple times because we knew that we'd probably find something dirty there, whether it was a gun, whether it was dope, whether
if it was a hole, if you mined it once, you'd mine it again.
Yeah, it was one of those things. I mean, we just practically drive with the back door open, and somebody would fall in with a charge, right? And without even working real hard. So we were looking for an arrest after helping out probation. So we're like, all right, let's go there. Danny always drove because he used to be an EVOC instructor. So he drove like a maniac and came inches from bumpers, but never hit anybody. I thought it was a miracle. But Danny was also built different than me. He was shorter and of the rounder persuasion. Right. I mean, he'd actually lost a ton of weight right before he was killed doing CrossFit with his daughter. He was actually getting in pretty good shape. Strong as an ox, but not the fastest guy in the world. And I was a little bit taller, a little leaner. So, I was good passenger. I was the get out and run guy, and he would drive me close and that kind of thing. And it worked out really well.
Perfect.
Plus, I hated daytime traffic. It drove me nuts after working graveyards all those years and not having to worry about cars as much. If I drove, my blood pressure went up and I was screaming at people. And
flecks of enamel coming off your teeth.
Yeah. So it was just easier to let him do it. So we pull into the parking lot and we're driving, just looking for people doing bad stuff, right? Ran a plate that we thought was related to something we dealt with earlier. So I'm looking on the computer, kind of running up the registered owner, trying to decide whether it was related and if we were going to go find out what room they were in, that kind of thing. And he's continuing around, and on this back side of the hotel, no cameras, no security. There's the rooms and then a pretty good gap and then a cinder block wall that separated the hotel from the theaters that used to be there.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I had forgotten about that wall.
Yep.
At the Century, right?
Yep. It's about a, 10-foot cinder block wall. And that was where most of the dirt occurred because it was out of sight from the road. It was secluded. You could park back there, and so that's where a lot of people did their dirt. So, we're rounding the corner, and Danny puts the car in park, and he says there's two in the car. And I'd worked with him long enough, done plenty of stops that, I'm looking at the computer at the time. So I look up and I see the car, and it's a Mercury Marquis, and the trunk's open, and he's already out kind of walking towards the car. So I jump out, and I'm heading to the passenger side, right, as we do, side-by-side approach, because if there's two in the car, you got to assume they're not both on the driver's side. And I couldn't see the other person, so I kind of assumed passenger side. And because I can't see him, I kind of take a wide berth getting around so I can view the side of the car. And as I get around there, I see a female standing by the back passenger door. And I start approaching her, and I'm trying to get her attention, right? Hey, turn around. And I say it a couple times, and she's like, she is zoned out just right on Danny. And finally, I get her to turn around, and as she turns around, her hand goes on the trunk, and she shuts it. And in my mind, red flashes go off. I'm like, okay,
exactly.
Once we get this situation taken care of, we're going to get in this car because there's something in that trunk.
There's a reason for that.
And she's got this look on her face, and now I know what it is. But at the time, I couldn't figure out but it was off. Something was off, and I'm like, okay, I need to keep her, So I'm focused on her. Obviously, Danish approaching the driver's side, and and she was a fairly good sized girl. And the way she was standing in the door, I told her, I'm all sit down, not flipping her legs in there, but kind of sit on the edge of the seat, right? Keep your hands where I can see them. And as soon as her butt hit that seat, I heard about 6-7 shots come out from the driver's side of the door. And I'm standing basically at the back passenger door at this point. Immediately, of course, I divert my eyes over to that area, and I don't see anything, and that was disturbing because Danny wasn't the tallest guy in the world, but I should have seen.
You should have seen.
I should have seen him standing
over the roof.
Over the roof, yes. And I didn't see him. And of course, all this is happening in a matter of microseconds, right? So I'm starting to back up, draw my gun, completely ignore her. Now, I'm not even looking at her. Turns out that she had a gun in her purse, and she could have pulled it out and got me, and I would have never seen it coming because I was so focused on right where the shots were coming from, which I knew wasn't her because I was watching her. So I back up a little bit, and as I'm backing up, that's when the suspect popped up from the driver's side and leveled his 9mm at me over the top of the car. I'm kind of near the back tail light at this point, and he starts capping off rounds at me. And I remember hearing the first one, and then I didn't hear anything after that, not a sound.
Yep.
I knew he was still shooting because I could see the muzzle flash, and I could literally feel the bullets going by my neck, my ears. He was missing my head by, I don't know, but I could feel the bullets going by me. So it wasn't by much. And I'm a fairly decent sized target. I'm 6'2", about 240 at the time. And we weren't very far away. So how he missed me, it was a miracle.
I remember in the book that he said something similar to, that guy, meaning you, was dancing around all over the place.
Which was funny in it, and not funny, but I can't think of a better word for it, was if you'd asked me, I'd have bet you an entire paycheck that I was standing planted in the ground without being able to move and returning fire at him, and that I was planted. I wasn't moving. But apparently, that range training where you shoot, move, paid off because I was moving and didn't even know it.
Yep.
So eventually, obviously, I get my gun drawn. I start returning fire. He ducks down. Because of where I'm at, I can't see him anymore. So I start feeding rounds through the back window to where I believe that he is ducked down to, trying to get to that driver's side area. And this is where that whole slow motion thing kicked in. I remember watching the first, I can't say I can see the bullet itself, but I remember watching the first one hit the back window and I could see the splinter. And then I could see each round, I ended up shooting 16 rounds. And each one of them, I could see the impact as it hit the window, the back window. And it was a good grouping. Later, after I'd calmed down and stuff, I could actually feel kind of, proud of myself for being able to get it that close. Unfortunately, every single round except for one got sucked up by the car, the pillar, the seat, all the metal in it. They were all where I wanted them to go, but they all got sucked up. One made it through. I didn't know it at the time, but one made it through and got him in the hand, which turned out good for the trial part of it because he ended up bleeding over all the other scenes that he went to after the fact.
Lots of DNA.
So after 16 rounds, I decide, okay, I'm going to reevaluate and start sidestepping right, slicing the pie, see where Danny is, see where he's at. Maybe I hit him, maybe I didn't, right? At this point, I didn't know. Take about one step to the left to come around on the driver's side, and I see the front post of an AR come up from where he went down. And I recognized it immediately because it's the same kind of A-frame that I had on my AR, which unfortunately was in the trunk of our car, which was way too far away and at a bad angle for me to even get to. Mine kicked into overdrive at that point of, I only got a few rounds left in my handgun. I'm in the middle of a parking lot with no cover and wearing a vest that doesn't stop rifle rounds. So I beat feet, 7, 8 cars to the east, get behind one of the tires because I remember, going to the range and them saying the best spot is behind the wheels because they're thick enough they might actually stop some rounds. And most rounds go through trunks, especially rifle rounds would go through a trunk, and that like it was made out of toilet paper, so I didn't want to hide right behind the trunk. And I remember thinking this all within seconds, right? Blurted out some radio traffic, the shoot, shots fired, officer down, Motel 6, it was all real quick stuff. And I remember while I was doing that, I remember hearing a single shot from over by the car. And immediately in my head, I started screaming because I'd watched enough training videos where the suspect shot an officer and then walked up on him and finished him off. And in my mind, that's exactly what happened. Forensically down the road, we don't know where that shot was or what it was. It wasn't what I thought it was because Danny was already dead at that point. But in my mind, that's what happened. And I remember whether I screamed out loud or to myself, I have no idea. But I remember thinking, oh, fuck, he just executed Danny. Then survival instinct kicked in and realized that I had a guy out there with a gun and I didn't know where he was at. And he could be coming around on me. Been at that hotel a million times, so I developed a little game plan of how I was going to come back around on him. Now I was going to go into the interior, come around through the interior, and then there was an opening just past where he was parked, and it'd give me a good shot at the driver's side area, that kind of thing. To do that, I had to run past a breezeway or an opening to get into where I wanted to go to get around on him. And as I did that, I was looking down to where the car was, and I see it start to back up. Immediately decided to change my game plan because I didn't want him to get away. So I started running down the walkway towards the car. As it backed up and then started to pull forward, it bumped like it went over a curb. Unfortunately, I knew there was no curbs there, and I knew he'd run over Danny. My mind I short-circuited a little bit, and I'm really a little pissed at myself, but my goal was to feed some rounds into that car, and I didn't get him off because when I saw that happen, it put a pause button on me for a second.
Oh, then, last thing you would expect.
Yeah, and then once I recomposed myself, he was around the corner, and I didn't see the car again. As it rounded the corner, I distinctly remember thinking, he's gone, he's going to get away, we're never going to see him again, and it's going to be another unsolved shooting like Mitchell.
Yep, that's when you stopped there at that point, I thought, Jeff Mitchell.
Yep.
And do you want to talk about that briefly, or
yeah? So
me too.
No, yeah, I can talk about it. So briefly, Jeff Mitchell,
they know.
years before, was one of our deputies working in our south area. Came across a van that most likely was a body dump type situation. It was before in-car cameras and a couple other things.
Terrible timing for that. How sad.
He keyed his radio. They did a check on him. When they got out there, they found him. Looks like he'd been at a tussle and ended up getting shot with his own gun. And to this day, the suspects are still outstanding.
Yeah, no suspects.
A lot of rumors, this, that, and the other thing. And that was what I believed was going to happen with this. And I hadn't even seen Danny yet, right? So I continued running around the last car. And that's when I first finally saw Danny laying there, gun still in his holster, and he had a gunshot wound to his head.
Folks, are you beginning to understand the depth and the breadth of evil involved here? Because that's the extent that evil will go to.
And it gets, he didn't, and that's only a fraction of that guy's day too.
Oh yes, it continued.
Yeah, by a lot. And I'd seen enough people, whether self-inflicted or through a shooting, with injuries like Danny's, and and what I saw, which I'm not going to go into detail right now. I knew he was gone. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a question. I knew instantly. Of course, you still do what you can. I don't know if it's for yourself or it's for the people watching, but, went down, checked for pulse, that kind of thing. I remember hearing a scream from one of the balconies, and I remember turning and yelling at people to go inside, but not to go anywhere. Started getting some more radio traffic out there because I knew this guy was out there and I didn't want anybody else to get hurt.
To which I would suggest that's remarkable composure.
And I even doubted myself based on the way the rest of the day went, whether I had done that. And I'll get back to it, but the beauty of those critical incident debriefings that they do after these kind of things was I was able to talk with our dispatcher who said I did get it out and he did repeat it, which for the guilt that I was feeling,
beautiful,
was a tremendous thing for him to say to me, and was to somebody that felt like they had the entire universe on their shoulders. It was one less weight that I was bearing after he said that, which was huge for me. So I'll kind of go with what he did the rest of the day, and then we can kind of go back to how they dealt with me and the rest of my stuff after that. But
okay. So
the suspect from there, and I'll kind of go through these because I wasn't personally involved, but I'll tell you what I know. So he left where I was at, tearing ass out of there. He was bleeding all over the place. He had holes in his car, realized he had to get rid of his car. So he goes, I don't want to say it was only a little over a mile down the road to a court.
It wasn't far, Spanos Court.
Unfortunately, comes across, and I'm not going to use his name because I didn't get permission in the book, and I'm not going to use it now. But he comes across a civilian who's waiting for a doctor's appointment, walks up to him and says, "Give me your car." And this particular civilian had been around the block a time or two, very streetwise. I
sensed this.
He was very streetwise. And he basically looked at him and said, "I don't know you. I ain't giving you my car." Well, Brock, the bad guy, basically smirked, grinned, and then shot him. 6 times?
6 times, I believe.
Several, and he put his arm up, so he got some of them in the arm, some of them in his face. And then he walked away from him, and he lived, by the way. And I've actually had a good conversation with him since then.
Oh, his victim
his
statement?
Victim, yeah.
At the end?
Oh, yeah.
Was classic.
It was beautiful. But him and I had a good conversation over the phone once because I wanted to meet him and whatnot. But so he went from him and went across the court, and a young lady that was going to the gym or getting back now, I can't remember, puts a gun in her back and says, "Give me your car," a little Mustang. She, of course, is traumatized by this, and he gets the car. The suspect's wife helps him transfer guns into the car, the whole deal. They take off in that. They realize that, okay, a lot of people saw us do this, so we need another car. So they go into a neighborhood. They try to steal a car from some landscapers. because the car's out front. Hey, give me the keys, and they're like, they're our boss's cars. We don't have keys. They were lying. The keys were actually in the cars, but they told him they didn't have keys. So he takes off, goes a little further down the road, contacts another group of landscapers, demands the car at gunpoint. They all right, but then they talk to him and convince him to let him take their trailer off, so that because it's their livelihood. So he actually helps them remove their trailer from the vehicle and then steals their truck. He tells them not to call. Of course they do.
They did.
And at that point, that's when the description of the truck came out, the license plate, whatnot. Well, he was in a tailspin at this point, didn't know where he's going, got on the freeway. We was heading up the freeway up 80, sees one of the blue alert signs, the road signs that Caltrans has.
Right.
And, his wife actually pointed out and said, hey, that's our car. And so he drives off the first exit. Doesn't even know where he's going. Dives off up there at Auburn. Gets off, plowing through these neighborhoods, ends up pulling over in front of a house. Now, the funny thing about this house is he happens to pull over in front of the house of a retired CHP officer that's sitting there drinking coffee.
I remember
listening to KFBK, who's talking about the shooting and describing his car right at that moment. So he, of course, sees what's going on and says, well, not here. So he calls it in.
Time for a phone call.
Right, time for a phone call. They take off the plate, switch it, or they take off the license plate, and they take off in the truck. At this point, Auburn PD, Placer County SO, everybody's starting to come to the area because they realize that's where he's at. Two of their officers end up, as he's trying to carjack a BMW from in front of a house to switch out from the truck, because now they know that people know what the truck looks like. He's about to carjack another car, and that's when Placer contacts him. Two officers pull up, and pretty much they hadn't even finished pulling up, and he starts unloading with the AR on their car. They both bail out the doors because they're, you're not going to sit in the car when somebody's filling the windshield full of holes. They bail out, didn't quite get it in park, and their car rolls forward, bumps into the truck. He jumps in it and takes off without his wife, leaving her in the truck. And the two officers try to call it out, but where they're at, the radios suck. It's very hilly, very mountainous up there. Yeah. And the radios just didn't work very well. And so that some of the traffic got out, some of it didn't. Some of it got repeated, some of it didn't. And this is the unfortunate, just tragic part is, so Mike Davis and his partner, a couple other people were in the area, and they see this patrol car go flying by. Well, they think it's a Placer chasing the suspect. So they jump in behind it because the way it's driving, they figure they know where they're going, right? And we've all been there, right? We see a car go by and we're like, okay, I haven't heard anything yet, but this is going to be good. So they jump in behind it. It goes into a cul-de-sac, pulls into a driveway. Well, they pull into the cul-de-sac. They see the car in the driveway, so they're starting to get out. Well, as soon as they get out, they start getting fire on them. They're not even looking at the patrol car because it's a patrol car. They're not looking at direction initially because they think that somebody is shooting, the suspect is shooting, or the officer shooting at the suspect somewhere. By the time they figured out that it was the suspect from the patrol car shooting at him, Mike Davis took a round through his vest, through the chest, and took out his lungs and most of the stuff in between there. And then another deputy took a ricochet and got some shrapnel in his arm, hand area. And then the suspect eventually grabbed the gun out of the patrol car, the shotgun, went down a hill and down into a valley. Mike, they tried to do CPR on the hood of a car as it's driving up the street to try to get him to the life flight helicopter. With the life flight helicopter, they couldn't put him on there because of the CPR and there wasn't enough room, so they put him in a medic and took him to the local hospital, but he was gone before they got there.
That was an amazing story in and of itself.
Yes.
The CHP officer.
Yes, it was. Yes.
That worked on Mike Davis.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Astounding.
Yeah, and the fact that, when he went all the way to the hospital with him and then, stood by his side because he knew that we never leave one behind. It was amazing, right? It shows that it doesn't matter what patch you got on your arm. We're all brothers, man. It didn't matter that one was Placer and he was CHP. He wasn't leaving him behind, and he worked his tail off on that guy.
Just that story in itself is amazing. That's why you have to read the book.
Yeah.
folks.
Oh, it's great. And obviously I'm hitting just the highlights, right? And then suspect went down into a valley, contacted a civilian up, and then into a house where the homeowner saw him, went out the one door while he came in the other one. rummaged through the house looking for another gun. Took a crap on the carpet, bled all over the place, found some limoncello, drank that as much as he could, wrote a note to his wife, turned on the gas so that if other officers came in, he was hoping to blow everybody up. That was his goal. Thank God that didn't happen. And actually, he took a nap at one point, too. The civilian that went out called, obviously, and then about every SWAT team in the area was around the thing, and every helicopter in the area was overhead. They pumped enough gas into that house to kill a small army. And at that point, the suspect eventually came out, literally crawling on his back with his hands up in the air, not giving, any reason to shoot. And that's the difference between us, the good guys and the bad guys, right? As much as I'm sure somebody would have loved to have, ended the evil day or that guy right at that moment, he didn't give us a reason to. And no. They did their job, and they did it professionally, and I'm actually very proud of them for how they conducted themselves that day. Even though I can imagine, how hard it was, right?
Again, remarkable composure.
Yes.
On your part, on everyone else's part, in incalculable exigent circumstances, packed with irony that day.
Yeah, it was, several things that I've obviously thought about afterwards. Just listening to my sergeant at the time talk about how he drove to the scene. I can't believe there wasn't one accident. And after driving around, right? I cannot. It's unfathomable to me that there wasn't one accident with the way people were driving either to the scene or every time it called out, "We think he's here. We think he's here." Not one accident.
Oh, and there were multiple scenes.
Yes,
just in Sacramento County, 4 different scenes.
Yeah. And not like I said, just that alone, I think is a miracle in and of itself. And
but speaks
I'm glad too.
Volumes, I think, to the professional standards to which the people around in this law enforcement community are trained.
Yeah, between that and the investigation, I've never been more proud of my people than at that time. I didn't obviously register it at the time, but looking back on it, I very proud of how they all did.
Folks, I want to remind you of one thing, and then we're going to continue. I said I'm not going to have any promos tonight, but I just want to remind everybody of this.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
And for the people who are in the chat room, thank you very much for being there. I see one is Leslie Holker. She's been there before, and also another individual called River Spirit. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Folks, we're talking to Deputy Scott Brown of the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department about his book entitled Facing Evil. It's the story of an on-duty murder of his partner, Danny Oliver, and the subsequent murder of Placer County Sheriff's Detective Michael Davis. You can find Scott Brown's book, Facing Evil, on Amazon in paperback or Kindle. And I have that website up here since you mentioned it. If you want to go to Scott's website, that of he and his wife Liz, you can go to scottandlizbrown.com, and you can get the book there. And you also indicated that it's you can go to the Danny Oliver site and purchase it there as well.
Yes, and there's a link to that at the bottom of our webpage as well. Okay. You just got to click on the symbol.
So Scott, all one word, obviously, Scott and Liz, Liz, Brown.com, scottandlizbrown.com. I mentioned irony, and I just want to go through this very quickly. There was a deputy that ended up pulling you away from Danny, and it was a deputy named Bob French in what may have been an event of foreshadowing, I guess, itself, because Deputy Bob French was shot and killed outside of the Ramada Inn in the 2600 block of Auburn Boulevard, in the same district in which you guys were operating, District 4.
Maybe 3 miles?
Yeah, if that. And that was my primary district when I was in patrol in the 80s, which dates me terribly. and Bob French was conducting an auto theft investigation at about 10:30 in the morning, and he was shot there. He was age 52, and he served for 21 years. The other bit of irony, and I may get the years wrong, perhaps, Scott Brown, you can correct me. The day that Placer County Detective Michael Davis was shot and killed by this animal was, 26 years to the day of Michael Davis's dad, his father, senior, dying for the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. Riverside
Yeah.
Sheriff's Department. And he died that day, if I'm not mistaken, in a helicopter crash.
Yes.
Again, two pieces of bitter irony that you can't replicate otherwise.
Well, and there's actually another piece that makes it even a little more ironic, creepy. I'm not sure how you want to word it. Bob French was killed 10 years to the day that his parents died in a plane crash.
I had no idea.
Yep.
So, folks, we are speaking to Deputy Scott Brown. You were transported away from the scene. Basically, that's what happens in an OIS, which is an officer-involved shooting. I worked homicide, so I worked some OIS scenes. So you're transported away, and your work for that scene essentially ends there. But that's essentially the beginning. Once you were transported away from that scene, what then happens?
So a lot of stuff happens.
Yeah.
Well, first off, I mean, there's two names on this book, right? My name and Vicky's, my co-author, but there might as well be three. My wife's name should be on it as well, because
and thank you for going there.
A lot of gaps in my memory, and she remembered so much more than I did, right? Because I could tell you everything leading up to that scene and through that scene in crystal clear, high definition, right? Soon as I left that scene, I could remember events and different details, but I would remember them in the wrong order, or I would be off by a little bit because, it was like, short-circuited. I was running on, 100,000% up until a certain point, and then when it all came down, everything stopped working, right? And that includes my memory and my brain and everything else, right? I don't even know if I could have spelled my name by the time I got to our detective division. I was so distraught. First thing I did while I was in the car was call my wife, and all I could do was I tried to call her a couple times, and went to voicemail. And I used to joke that she screened my calls. She'll answer everybody else on the first ring, but mine for some reason, right? And so then I text her, and all I text her was "I'm okay," and she got that because she was home with our three boys. We have three little kids at the time, especially we had 2 under 3 and then a 5-year-old, and she was dealing with all them, right? So her phone she was just busy. And she sees it and she realizes, whoa, that's not a normal text from him, right? That's not what you send. So she called, and I couldn't even talk on the phone. I had to give to the sergeant detective that was with me, and he ended up telling her, hey, Scott's okay physically, but he's going to need you, right? So that started the motion of them going to get her and figuring out what was going on, and she got herself ready. And this is all in the book. And honestly, a lot of people that have read this thing have been like, your story's great, and not great, but intriguing, I guess. But I had no idea about the spouse's side of this thing, from officers especially. Like I have no, people, they see movies, right, and they see documentaries and they read books, right, but not a lot of stuff goes into the spouse's side of it, the family side of it, and we did in this, right? Because what affects one affects the other. If you don't think it does, you're lying to yourself.
Literally hundreds of people were affected by this animal.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm still finding people that remember it to this day. They remember seeing the news. I mean, the trial, I remember talking to people, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but, throwing stuff at their TV, right? Because they were so mad at his antics. And when I bring it up, when I start talking, they're like, you're that guy. I'm like, yeah, I'm that guy. So anyway, I call my wife, get her going. They take me to the detective division. They put me in a room, asked me if I'm hurt. And all of a sudden I was like, well, I know he shot at me, and I've heard that you can get hurt with not knowing it because of adrenaline and all this other stuff. I'm like, so I kind of did that. When you ask a dog if he wants to go for a walk and he does the head tilt, I kind of liken it to that. And I'm like, I don't know. I think I'm okay. And so I peeled my tack vest and kind of did a check over with my hands looking for blood, and didn't come up with any. And my wife got there. Chaplains, they asked if I wanted a chaplain. I said, yeah, maybe somebody from my church. So they called the church, got somebody there. People were checking in on me. CSI showed up. I had to put all my stuff back on to photograph me because they wanted, how I was at the scene, right? So he couldn't do that whole I didn't know he was a cop thing. So they wanted to see what I look like, with all my stuff on. While we were sitting there, that's when we found out about Mike. And I'd been crying pretty constantly, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, pretty much after I got there. And mostly out of guilt, I'll be honest. My survivor's guilt, even to this day, it rears its head up every once in a while. Danny was my partner. I was supposed to protect him. I was supposed to keep him safe, and I didn't. I failed. And I looked at it that way, and that I missed something. There was something I didn't do. I should have stayed, when I saw the AR, should I have stayed where I was and shot it out with him a little more? Now I've come to grips with the fact that if I'd have done that, yeah, I guess maybe I could have gotten him, but then we also could have been gone to 3 funerals that day instead of 2. It took a lot of time and convincing to get myself to realize that. And then when I heard about Mike, oh my God, I almost collapsed on the floor, because if I felt guilty for Danny, I felt like I might as well have driven up to Placer County and shot Mike myself for not taking that guy out in the parking lot. It was my fault that happened. That's the way I looked at it, right?
Well, yeah, because the mind does the extension.
Right. And apparently I thought I was, perfect and Superman, because, that's the only way that would have ended differently, right? Again, since then, I've talked to his partner. I've talked to his widow, and they're like, no, there's nothing, we're glad you're alive. And if it would have started in Placer County, you and Danny would have been chasing him down in Sac, right? I mean, that's what you guys do. His wife even raised her voice a little bit, said, don't take that away from him, right? And I never looked at it that way. I just looked at my own guilt of I should have stopped this guy.
Yep.
So a lot of guilt, a lot of crying, a lot of what did it felt like it was my fault. I felt like everything was my fault from that point on. Anything that went bad, it was my fault. So we did that. Eventually we had to go do a walkthrough of the scene. So basically what they do is there's like, well, they asked if I could do it. And I said, well, will it help with the investigation? Right. And they said, well, yeah, it will, but you don't have to. And I'm like, well, anything to help, right? Because I knew he was still on the run at that point.
So you're taken from that scene, allowed to go to another place, regroup a bit. And now after 3.5 hours, you're taken back.
Yes. And so I was driven back there. And at that also time, Danny's widow, Susan, had been in San Diego on a business trip. And she had found out that by this point, she'd found out that he'd been shot. And then eventually San Diego, SO, I believe it was, eventually gave her notification that Danny was dead. But she had to board a Southwest flight to get back to Sacramento, unfortunately. So I couldn't be with Susan. So Liz, they took her to the airport. So she went to the airport to be with Sue while I was going to do my walk through the scene. Went to the scene, and I remember pulling up and seeing the tape and all the cars and everything, all the chaos, and seeing we actually had two guys that had finished their regular patrol training but were kind of doing their pop ride along that day. And I remember they were lifting up the tape from the area that we were going through, and they both had these looks on their faces, like, I mean, just this wide-eyed look. So we pull in, and it was probably the longest walk I think I've ever done in my entire life, because we had to clear a lot of the parking lot to get behind a tactical van before they kind of took me over to the scene. So they got me behind the van and kind of told me what they wanted me to, they're all, we're going to show you the scene. Danny's not there anymore, but there's blood and there's evidence markers. And all we want to know is kind of where you went and where you were standing, right? So I said, okay. And came out from that corner, and I mean, I felt like I got punched in the chest. I got through it, but
because it's there all over
there.
again.
Yeah, I mean, I was being back at the scene, right? I was back in that exact time frame. I mean, shell casings, everything, right? So we got through it, and they threw me back in the car, took me back to the detective division. And then that's when, the whole range master came to switch out the guns, and then representative for the law firm showed up for my interview, and because they still had to do the interview with the homicide detectives. Sat around for hours waiting for that. Eventually went in, did the interview. My wife that night negotiated for them to put us up in a hotel room because for several reasons. One, get away from the media. Two, we'd already had plans for our kids to go out of town or stay with grandma because we were actually going to go out of town that weekend. So that was kind of taken care of. And she knew I really couldn't function as a father right away. And 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and less than a 1-year-old was not going to understand why I was, sad. And I didn't have it in me to explain it or anything like that. Plus, at the time, there was all sorts of rumors about we didn't know who this guy was, and there was ties to the Sinaloa cartel and blah, blah, blah. So they wanted to kind of sequester us so they could figure out if there was any danger there, right? So they threw us up in a hotel room, and the team showed up there. Well, I saw the team before we left, and then they all came to the hotel room and hung out there for a little bit. And I remember being in the hotel room. Our pastor showed up, prayed with me a little bit, which helped. And I remember being in the hotel room, and it was a suite, so we were around the corner. And I remember hearing a knock at the door, thinking, okay, who's showing up now? I was talking with, I think I was with my pastor at the time. And I remember hearing my parents, my folks walked in with my brother. I have a twin brother. And the three of them, my sister lives in the Bay Area, so she wasn't there. But they come in, and I can hear my mom in the other room. And, oh, hi, nice to meet you. And very upbeat and chipper and, just being my mom. And my dad was quiet, like being my dad. And the crazy thing so I came around the corner so I could say hi to him and, give him a hug. And as soon as she saw me, I've never seen my mom cry like that. And the kind of a shriek thing that she let out was just, and it came down to, she knew I was alive, but she needed to see me. Right. She knew the gist of it and she knew I was okay, but in her mind, until she saw me, I wasn't okay. Right.
And that's an earth-shaking event in itself to witness a parent do that.
Yeah, and she was faking it till she make it, right? When she walked in, she was totally just fronting for everybody, right? And then she couldn't when she saw me. And then my dad, I mean, I can honestly say I've seen the guy cry like twice in my entire life, and most of them are after this, but he didn't bawl or anything like that, but his eyes were leaking. He had allergies going that day, and other than a very long hug from my mother. And my dad came in, and he had probably the biggest bottle of Jack Daniels I think I've ever seen in my life. No, it was Crown. Anyway, they gotten it from it was a Costco one, so it was like and neither of us are big drinkers, but he set that thing down. He's all, I don't expect to get any of this back, and I looked at him. I'm all, you won't.
No.
And he didn't. I can say I didn't finish the whole thing myself. I shared as much as I could, but and then that night. Didn't sleep. Had what we call waking images. So if I was talking to you, I was seeing Danny's face with a hole. Talking to my wife, I was seeing Danny's face with a hole. Whenever my eyes were open, I was picturing that. Kept, flinching at loud noises, of course, everything was a gunshot. And like I said, 35 minutes of sleep for about 2 weeks straight, at least. You start to go a little goofy after a while, sleep deprivation type thing. But every time I closed my eyes, I was, picturing that and dreaming about it. So I didn't sleep very much. I was, for some reason, dead set on not taking any meds. I didn't want to drink myself to sleep because I knew that was a bad idea. And but eventually I caved in and got some prescriptions just to help me kind of get back into a normal sleep rhythm. Did that for about a week, and that worked. And then I stopped, and I was back into like kind of somewhat normal sleep.
Smart man.
Still, even to this day, I mean, Liz, she used to, I'm a very sound sleeper. I could sleep through a hurricane kind of thing, right? And, she used to send the kids in to wake me up, and they jump on the bed, and Dad, and all this other stuff. Sometimes their aiming was bad and got me right in the nuts, but, that'll really wake you up.
Oh, yeah.
But after this incident, she couldn't do that anymore because I'd come out of bed ready to fight. And even herself, like she had to like kind of shake my foot, stand back. There was a couple times we decided I couldn't have my gun right by the bed anymore because I'd fly out of bed and grab it and be ready to clear the house, right? And that's not a good thing with kids in the house or a wife. And there were several times I didn't hurt her, but I tried to arrest her in the middle of the night. Never did that before. And there was one time she woke up with me on top of her, grabbing her wrists, and scared the bejesus out of both of us once we figured out what was going on. And I can safely say that has all faded away through therapy and a whole bunch of other stuff. But it just changed everything in my life, every aspect of it. And then of course there's all the stuff afterwards. There's the funeral services. I'd never been to one before. I was always that guy that I didn't know him well enough. And so I'll work the overtime so that the guys that knew him could go, right? No disrespect or anything like that. I figured I don't want to take a seat for a guy that really should be there for his friend. So I always worked him instead of going to him. So Danny's was my first one. And we did Danny's one day and Mike's the very next day. And it was hard. It was very hard. Both of them. I remember somebody asking me, why are you going to go to both? Isn't that too much for you? I said, there's no way I'm going to miss the service for the guy that got killed trying to catch my partner's killer. Not a chance. It's not happening.
4 days later, the two suspects were charged with 14 felony counts, including murder, attempted murder, carjacking, possession of weapons by a felon. 5 of the counts were considered special circumstances at the time, which is in 2014, which could yield the death penalty. So, to summarize to date, essentially at this point, you're having to deal with, and I had to write this down because this lit up my brainstem. You have to deal with the event itself. You have to deal with personal guilt. You have to deal with the second guessing of everything. You get no sleep. With lack of sleep comes the inability to focus, which becomes a physical drain because the mind and the body are as one, as I'm sure you've discovered.
Oh, yeah.
The constant, never-ending replaying in your mind, I call it the brain theater, which visits me. You have to think of your wife, because now she's involved, Liz, your family, your relatives, your friends, your coworkers, your department, the district attorney and the various investigators, your neighborhood, and your community, and so much more. There's so much more to this story, which is why I recommend, as a reminder, folks, we're listening tonight to Deputy Scott Brown of the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, and we're talking about his book entitled Facing Evil. The reason I come back to this is because until you read the book, and again, I thank you for being here tonight, Scott, but until you read the book, you won't appreciate the depth and breadth of people and institutions and organizations that are affected by, in this case, not just one incident, but it became a leapfrogging series of incidents that involved an ever-expanding cadre of individuals from this one evil person. And that's why I highly recommend the book. There's so much to it that's internalized and externalized. If I could just for a second, because what I'd like to do is I would like to get to the trial.
Yes.
And then the sentencing. Because, folks, you haven't heard anything yet about this individual. There's so much more. Could we talk for a moment about your wife, Liz?
Yeah.
And what she means to you. What, to the people that don't have, or officers that go through this, that don't have a Liz, what a blessing.
Oh, yeah. my wife was amazing that day, and it's true. You don't know necessarily how somebody's going to react until they're, put up into the fire, right? And she is so far from law enforcement. It's not even funny, right? It's not her job. She's not a cop. She has no intention of being a cop. I didn't come home and share all the gory stories with her. That kind of stuff. That was two different lives, right? And what she stepped up to that day, not only for me, but for Susan and everything else, was just nothing short of heroic. And I can honestly say that I wouldn't be sitting here today if it weren't for her. We'd known each other since we were 18, started dating freshman year of college. She was my strength when I didn't have any. She made good decisions when I would have made bad ones. She was somebody to eventually, not only bounce stuff off of and vent to, but now she's my partner in this, right? She, like I said, her name could be on that book too. And her and I are now trying to help officer couples. And, she's just as important in this story, if not more, than myself.
And that's why I wanted to mention that. The other thing I'd like to mention, which I believe is very important, and before we started speaking during the streaming, you mentioned, and I want to reemphasize, that in this book there are a ton of resources for people who get involved in incidents like this that I wish existed a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, but they're delineated here in this book so that if people want to, they can get the help, not just as an individual, but as families, groups, all of those things. And I think that aspect is a major blessing of this book, that the compilation exists within here at the end of the book.
And that's really the reason we wrote it, was, you got to give the story right to give context. And especially cops, we're a bunch of cynical SOBs to begin with. So unless somebody's been there and done that, we don't listen to them, right? We're not going to listen to that new guy. He may say the right things, but if he doesn't have any scars on him, we're not going to pay any attention to him. So that's the context of the story, is just to set the stage, right? It's not that I look forward to telling that story or, reliving it over and over again, but you got to give some context as to why you're there. But that's the reason we wrote the book, was to help people, to give resources to maybe save that marriage, maybe save that officer from, wanting to start his gun, because that's happening at an alarming rate. And a lot of things, we believe that this book is a way of saying you're not alone, right? That feeling that you're having of, an anxiety attack. I've had that, the upset stomach, the muscle tension, the headaches, the anger. It's normal. And it's hard to say it's normal because it doesn't feel normal. But this book is another way of letting those people know that you're not alone. Those things are normal, but you can work through them, and there are resources. There are things you can do to help yourself out. And we hope that that's one of the things that people get out of this.
I'm looking at the page here. Since I was on the department, I was thinking that I wasn't going to do this, but I think maybe it bears mentioning. Since I've been on the department, 14 deputies have been killed during the time that I worked, up until I retired in 2016. There was Deputy Stuart Baird in 76, Detective Chris Boone in 79, Detective Gene Luther in 80, Detective Dave Miller in 83, Sergeant Rick Defner in 88, Deputy Sheriff Sandy Larson in 98. One of the reasons we got evac, as a matter of fact. Oh, we only had to kill somebody to get evac. No problem. That's a bitter point for me.
I can tell.
Deputy Sheriff Kevin Blount and in 2005, and Deputy Sheriff Joe Kievernagel in a helicopter accident. We'd already mentioned Jeff Mitchell in 2006. Deputy Sheriff Voon Nguyen in 2007, Paul DeRone in 2008. Paul was struck by a car in the fog on a levee road. I don't remember in the 80s, I believe, lost a good portion of his leg and his hip. And I was very bitter at the sheriff at the time because we had numerous people on the department who were taking niche boutique spots. And if there was anybody that was ever a loyal individual to the department, it was Paul DeRone. He eventually passed from his injuries in 2008. Larry Canfield in a motor crash in 2008. Of course, Danny in 2014. And then after I retired, there was Bob French, Deputy Sheriff Mark Stasiuk, and the most recent individual, Deputy Sheriff Adam Gibson, who passed away in 2021. All just within our department, just within those years. And it doesn't appear to be getting much better. And this is on the order of funerals. Now, you went to Danny Oliver's funeral, obviously. You were at the Adventure Church in Roseville, if I'm not mistaken. I got to look here to see November 3rd of 2014. Okay, understood. The very next day, you went to the funeral of Placer County Sheriff's Detective Michael Davis. Very next day, same church.
Yes.
Absolutely astounding. I don't think I could have done that. 2 funerals, 2 separate individuals, 2 days in a row. How did you cope?
I think,
I don't know. I don't know how you did it.
Again, I'm going to attribute it a lot to Liz. Without her by my side, I don't know if I could have. I'll tell you what, the interesting, crazy thing about it is, so those funerals, right? It's a lot of, you're sitting. It's a funeral, and it's not like I worked that day. I was still off work or anything like that. By the end of those 2 days, my body, because I was so tense and trying to hold myself together, I felt like I ran a marathon, got hit by a truck, and got beat up by a professional fighter all at the same time.
Yeah.
My body was a train wreck by the time I was done with those 2. My eyes hurt from crying. But just, it wasn't an option. There was no way I wasn't going to miss Danny's, and there was no way I was going to miss Mike's.
Well, it continued. Of course, it didn't stop there. So, Deputy Scott Brown, you came back to work for the POP team. Now, this was October 24th in 14. You came back in early February of 2015 to work at the POP team, same place you were employed, same place you were working, same unit on that particular day. How surreal was that?
Well, so when I went back, I told myself I had to go back to that team to prove to myself I could still do it.
Yeah.
Horrible idea.
On the horse.
Horrible idea. I should have gone. I should have let him put me somewhere else to go back to work instead of right there. But it is what it is, right? I had to prove it to myself. Liz was not ready for me to go back yet. Prior to that, she never really worried that much about what was going to happen, and now obviously things had changed. So that day, I promised her I wouldn't go out in the field. I'd just, stay in the office, do some computer work, and just kind of ease into it, right? Prior to this, I would drive to work and get off on that overpass and try to, okay, who are we going to go after? What are we going to go do today? I was very excited about work. After this, the first day back and several months afterwards, all I wanted to do was flip around to the other side of that overpass and drive straight back home. That day I went back to work, and going from a place that felt like home, it's a little bit like Cheers, you'd walk in, everybody started insulting you, but it was a good thing, right?
Right.
I don't know if everybody's like that, but if in cop work, if your friends aren't making fun of you, it's probably because they don't like you. If they're nice and polite to you or don't talk to you, that's not a good thing. So from going from a place that felt like home, right, and those guys joshing with me and giving me a hard time, I remember walking in and everybody talking. And as soon as I hit that room, you could have heard a pin drop, and everybody treated me like I was made out of glass. Like if they touched me, I was going to shatter. And no fault of their own, right? They didn't know. I didn't know. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew how to act. And it made me feel like an outcast. It made me feel out of place. It made me feel uncomfortable. I mean, just everything was wrong. And I remember just thinking, God, I hope it's not going to stay like this for very long, because I can't do it.
The thing that stuck with me in the book was you're going back to Pop, and they had held Danny Oliver's desk and his chair. And apparently they expected you to be there.
Well, I don't know about held it for me. I think part of it was a couple people had moved on to other assignments since then while I was off, and a couple new ones had come in. And I think it was more the fact that nobody was willing to sit at his desk.
Yeah. Nobody
Nobody wanted to. And when I got back, it was the only one left. And I didn't have the guts, balls, I don't know what you want to say, this ain't happening, right?
Okay.
So I ended up not only sitting at his desk, I ended up driving the same car and working the same area. And my poor partner after that had to. I think I had two of them since then that while I was still on the Pop team that I believe they were assigned probably to babysit me, make sure that I wasn't going to do anything stupid or behave myself. And they had to put up with some breakdowns and some other stuff, but both of them were amazing people and did a great job with me until I moved on to other things. When I finally realized that it was not a healthy place for me to be, took about 6 to 8 months, give or take, before I said, you know what, this isn't where I need to be. I'd wanted to be a detective for a long time, actually put in for it a couple times, hadn't gotten it. Very reluctant to put in for it again, because in my mind, anything I got at this point was going to be pity. Now, I was a hard worker. I was good at my job, and I should have been confident in that. But my confidence was shot.
But you can't help but think that.
And even after I got the job and was there for 5 years, I still couldn't shake the feeling in my head, couldn't convince myself that I didn't get it just because they felt sorry for me. And the lack of confidence and that feeling was hard. But yeah, it is what it is. I had my first panic attack when I went back, and it was literally just driving to a meal. We were going to have lunch, and the car ahead of us pulled somebody over, and we were just covering them. All I did was kind of get out and watch, because there was plenty of us. And as they were walking up to that driver's side door, my heart started going out of control. And all I could picture was the driver sitting there with a gun in his hand, waiting for them to clear that pillar and shoot him. And it went fine. They went up, told him, gave him a little warning, slow down kind of thing, whatever it was. It took me at least 45 minutes to an hour before I could even get back in the car to go eat, because I couldn't stop moving. My heart was racing. And again, my partners were phenomenal to stand by me, calm me down. And I remember thinking in my mind, at that point, I'm like, oh my God, if it's like this for the next however many years, I'm done. There's no way I can keep doing this job if every time I approach a car, or my partner does, this happens to me. Thank God I was able to push through it. Had some great advice for some people of just do another one, and eventually it goes away, from some people that have been through some pretty crazy events as well. And so I did, and eventually that part faded. Thank God.
Did you discover that there were things that would get to you, that would light the fire in the brain, that would take you back, that weren't necessarily associated to something that you thought it would be? I don't know if you know exactly what I'm saying, but maybe something linked to a vehicle stop. Okay, I get that. But were there things that you hadn't expected that all of a sudden tripped the circuit breaker and brought you back?
There were things that I couldn't even point to what that thing was. Like, I mean, there was times I'd be driving home and all of a sudden just be bawling.
Yeah.
I would, finish up a call, do a couple things, and all of a sudden I was so angry I wanted to break everything in the vicinity, right? And I couldn't. There were some of them I could pinpoint, right? Oh, we did a stop in this area, or I remember this from this area. That's probably what set it off, right? So a song on the radio, the wrong song on the radio would, set me off, right? And Liz and I,
wow.
It happened often enough, and it doesn't happen as much as it used to, but we used to start calling them Danny days. And just, I would every once in a while, if I knew it ahead of time or I was enough to be able to see it, I would text her. I'd be like, before I came home, I'd warn her. I'd be like, hey, Liz, today's a Danny day. And so she knew that I was sad, mad, whatever it was, and would, be able to handle me appropriately. And so that was kind of our code word, our affectionate of like, I had a trigger today. And so we call them Danny days.
You just hit something that kicked me right in the cortex. Music. I would hear songs. I would hear a verse from a song, and that would be enough right there. Out of nowhere. Absolutely out of nowhere.
Yeah.
What I'd like to do, folks, we're talking tonight to Deputy Scott Brown of the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, and it's about his book that I have right here called Facing Evil. And though we have 2 hours, and I swear to God I will wrap this up in about another half hour or so, it'll be 2 hours, and I'm sure that's more than enough.
Okay, yeah.
But the reason that I have Scott on tonight is because we're leading somewhere, we're going somewhere on this journey for a reason. And the other reason that I highly suggest the book is because there's so much information in here that I wish I had had many, many years ago. It's a compendium of all the lives touched, all the lives lost, all the resources that you can have. The story is so much bigger than the portion that you're hearing tonight, which is why I think this is absolutely so important. So what I would like to do, Scott Brown, if we could, is then begin to transition over into the court trial and then the sentencing. And then I'd like to talk to about something I don't know if you are interested in talking about this, is religion and the part that religion has played in your ability to cope. So first, if we could transition over into the trial of this, which begins on January 16th of 2018, that animals trial begins. And then it's not just refreshing the brain and making you go through it all over again. The evil didn't stop. The evil personified in this individual by the things that he did in the courtroom. Could you tell people when the trial began just some of the things that you can think of that he did and pulled in the courtroom?
Yeah, so the thing about the trial is I had 3.5 years roughly, and that's all I thought about. And I couldn't think of anything else. And finally that day came, and there's a lot of other stuff kind of around that, but finally went in there. And even before me going into the courtroom, I'd heard from the DA kind of warned me that, he's laughing. He's, saying stuff to the widows, to Susan and some of the other people in the galley behind. He's threatening jurors. He's laughing at them. He's pointing gun fingers at them. In his transportation to and from court, he's, telling the officers that they're going to die, that the cartel's after them, that their families are going to die, that he wished he'd have killed more officers. He's doing all this stuff even before. And then on the day I finally went in to testify, obviously I was nervous. I was actually more nervous leading up to it, but when I went in there, and I fully put this on the Lord kind of putting some calm over me, I went in there and started to testify. He laughed and said some quiet stuff at first, and then at a certain point, he started going off, telling me that I was a coward, that I killed my partner. And do you want to know what your partner said right before he died? I wish I'd have killed more.
And he's saying this in open court.
Oh, yeah, he's yelling it at me.
Yeah.
And even as he's getting taken out of the courtroom and taken down this, there's a downstairs area where they had because of his antics, they'd already set up a TV because he has to be present during his hearing,
right?
Where he could watch it on closed circuit television. He's yelling the whole way down. So he did that when I testified in the criminal phase, and then in the penalty phase, he did the same thing, yelling all sorts of stuff. And my goal when I went in there was to not only, give an accurate description of what happened, but I wanted to honor Danny. I wanted to honor my family. I wanted to honor my God and not show that he got to me. I didn't want to give him any more than he'd already taken from me. So as he's yelling these things, I just sat there, just staring straight ahead and not reacting, as much as I wanted to, because he wasn't very far away, and nobody would have been able to stop me before I got to him. But again, if you want to put it in simple terms, we're good guys. He's a bad guy, and that's not what I did. At one point, though, after he got taken out, I remember the judge bringing everybody back in, and I asked him, "Hey, can I have a minute?" He said, "Yeah, sure. There's an empty chambers right around the corner. Go ahead." And so I went around there, and I didn't even realize I did it. But the first thing I did was punch a metal cabinet, which sounded apparently like a gunshot or something, because they could hear it all the way out in the hallway. And the DA investigator, who I've become friends with since then, came running in. He's like, "What was that? Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah. Why? What's going on?" And even then, I had to stand in that room for a good 5 minutes, and I'm sure it looks silly as hell, but bouncing up and down and shaking my hands and shaking my arms, and because I had so much pent up energy from holding it in while he was yelling, that I had to let it out, right? And I couldn't go for a run. I couldn't, punch a punching bag. So I was literally bouncing up and down, shaking as much as I could, just trying to get the energy out. And then once I felt like I got it together, I went back in and sat down at the stand. The judge said, "You good?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm good." So he starts bringing it back in. Well, the bailiff brings over one of those stupid little Dixie cups with enough water that I don't know what they're supposed to actually do with it, because it's
a Dixie cup.
It's tiny.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm good, right? And as they're bringing people in, I pick the thing up, and my hand is shaking so bad, half the water goes thrown all over the place. I'm like, oh my God. So I pull it underneath, and for the rest of the thing, my hand stayed underneath where nobody could see them, because even though I thought I was good, I was still so amped up that it wasn't scared. I wasn't even nerves. It was so much adrenaline from sitting there and holding myself together that it had to let itself out, because it's biologically it does.
I called it vibrating with energy.
Yeah.
I would vibrate.
And it wasn't the only time. Like the first time I ever told the story in a debrief, my whole body shook so bad. I was embarrassed as hell. I was so embarrassed because my whole body was shivering like I had 103-degree temperature. Had I known that was normal, I might not have, felt so bad about it. Now I know that's a normal reaction. It's it is. And, but at the time, man, I'll tell you what, it was the weirdest thing in the world. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm possessed, right?
It's weird because you feel as if that's not you, and you have no control.
No.
Who is this?
No. Yeah.
Okay, so on February 9th of 2018, the jury notifies the judge that they'd reached a verdict. Now, there were two trials. You mentioned the girlfriend.
Yes.
And then there was the trial for the animal, as I call that lovely person. And then there was the trial for the girlfriend. When I read this book, and you didn't go into it, and I'm not sure, I'll just ask the question anyway. Do you think that, in retrospect, these years later, that she had any hand in pulling any trigger there at the scene?
No.
Okay.
No, and that's why she was never actually charged with Danny's. She only started getting charged at everything after Danny's, because literally she laid down in that back seat, and her statement was corroborated with evidence, but she basically laid down in that back seat as the bullets were flying. My bullets were flying over her through that back windshield. So no. And then as far as the other shootings and stuff like that, there was plenty of witnesses. All the shooting occurred from him.
Okay, so I want to read the verdict, and I'm looking at Scott's book, Facing Evil. And so the verdict comes back. The first verdict, guilty of first-degree murder of Danny Oliver. And the animal smiled, and he says, yay. After that's read. So then, guilty of first-degree murder of Michael Davis, guilty of special circumstances of a police officer in both cases, guilty of special circumstances of killing police officers to avoid arrest, guilty of special circumstances in killing Davis while carjacking, guilty of attempted murder of Scott Brown, guilty of attempted murder of the citizen that you had mentioned earlier on Spanos Court, guilty of the attempted carjacking of that individual, guilty of carjacking the owner of the white Mustang. And so he smiles as all these verdicts are being read. Guilty of carjacking the owner of the red Ford F-150 pickup. Guilty of attempted carjacking of the owner of the BMW. Guilty of attempted murder of two individuals, two other officers. Guilty of stealing a patrol car. Guilty of attempted murder of Jeffrey Davis, a Placer County officer. Guilty of possession of 9mm handgun, .380 handgun, assault rifle, and a shotgun while a felon, and guilty of possession of an assault weapon. I had to open up the book and read that.
Yeah, it was a lot of charges.
Just so that you have an idea, folks, all the charges that were involved.
And I can tell you from, at least for me, a guilty verdict does not bring the sense of justice that you would think it would.
No.
I mean, it's what we wanted, right? And my main goal in that trial was just to make sure that he didn't get out to hurt anybody else. And that was that goal, for that goal, it succeeded. But any sense of justice or finality or anything like that I was hoping for did not occur.
It didn't materialize.
It actually left a pretty good hole, because, like I said, for 3.5 years I had something to focus on. The trial. Okay, I'm focused on the trial. I'm focused on doing what I need to do to get there, to make it right, to do my part. And then after that was over, all of a sudden I looked up and realized that I didn't have anything to focus on anymore.
That is done now. Now what?
Yeah.
So the penalty phase starts on March 1st of 2018. And that individual, that animal, said some things to you during the penalty phase. To me, it appeared in the book, confirm or deny this if you would, Scott Brown, all it was is a naked attempt to get into your head.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was trying to get to me. I don't know if it was for his own enjoyment or wanted to see if I was going to do something to taint the trial. I don't know which one he was going for. But, yeah, he was definitely trying to get in there.
So on April 25th of 2018, the sentences then were revealed. And that was the day that citizen, and folks, I won't go into it here, read the book. That's when the citizen gave his succinct and pithy victim statement in concert with a physical gesture to the animal sitting in the courtroom.
It was direct and to the point.
Yes. Again, well written. So the sentences were 2 death penalties, and I have to read this. 3 15 to life sentences, 1 for attempted murder, and 375 years added for all the other crimes that were committed. And so, Scott Brown, that was it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping with the 2 death penalties that meant they were going to kill him, bring him back to life, and kill him again. Unfortunately, that's not how it works.
No such luck.
But that was it. And we walked out of the courtroom that day, and I actually ended up escorting some of the jurors back over to the DA's office so they could finish some paperwork because they didn't know where it was at. And that's really when I had to kind of start. That's when my true starting point for trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, trying to figure out how I was going to heal from this, trying to figure out how I was going to repair the damage I'd done to my family and everything else. Because, like I said, at that point, I neglected pretty much everything in my life up to that point because I was so focused.
There's a section, the third and final big section of your book, called Aftermath. And to me, the focus and the purpose of the book is essentially from that point on. It had been a living hell for you up to that point, but it gets to, okay, that's all finished. Now what? So reiterate to some of the people who may not have been here the first time when you said it, what's the purpose of the book and why are you here tonight?
So it started like you and I talked about. It started as a journal through therapy. I was told that it might help with the nightmares to write stuff down, so I started doing that. And then through some other events of speaking, I spoke at a couple things I got invited to, and realized that I could help people with this. And so when we decided to write this book, first off, I went and got permission from both the Olivers and the Davises and told myself I wouldn't take one step forward without their permission. And they're 100% behind it. I was nervous, though. I was like, I don't want people to think I'm trying to make a dime off of Danny's death or anything like that. And I really held me off for quite a while. But the nagging need and thought that I could help people with this just kept pushing me forward. So when we wrote it, we kind of wrote it for several reasons. The surface main one was, we want to help first responders through trauma, whether it's through a shared experience or letting them know that it's okay to go get help, letting them know that you can go through something like this and make it through the other side. Because we don't talk about this kind of stuff. We just, and hopefully the newer generations are better at it, but it used to be suck it up, buttercup, and move on, right? And you hold that stuff in and it becomes poison. And I was hoping that this book would dispel some of those stereotypes and some of those, mentality that we have. The second reason was for citizens, civilians, non-law enforcement. I was hoping that by reading this book, they would, maybe get rid of some of that crap they see on TV of, oh yeah, they get in a shooting and then they go home and they're good, right? It's another day at the office, right?
Sure. Disneyland. You go into Disneyland.
It would give them a good idea that not only do we go through these things, but we take them home with us. They affect us. They affect our families, and they don't go away right away. And that we're real people too with lives. And then kind of thirdly, and there's several other things kind of mixed in, but my faith was a huge part of it, and I wanted to display that in such a way that if somebody reading this had something missing in their life, a hole or whatever it is, that maybe they read this and they're like, maybe that's what I'm missing. Maybe it puts somebody in church. Maybe it puts them in counseling. Maybe it puts them to where they're finally going to get their marriage worked on or their own trauma worked on, whatever it is. And if it sparks something good, and like Liz and I said, and Vicky too, if this book ended up helping one person or one couple, I'm good with that. Even one is worth it. And it was a lot of work, and it was a lot of hard stuff to go through because we went through the crime report. We did interviews with a ton of people. We looked through photos. I wanted to make sure it was as accurate as possible because I didn't want to misrepresent anything. But then also pouring out our heart and soul onto it. We were very open and very honest, and that's very hard to do, especially when you're going to start giving it to other people. But we knew we had to be open. We knew we had to be honest, and we couldn't hold anything back because cops especially are good at reading that bullshit meter. And, I didn't want to blow any sunshine, and I didn't want to hold back because I knew that maybe something that even I didn't realize could help somebody could hit a chord with somebody. So we put it all in there.
The cop radar is remarkably accurate when we focus it out. When we focus it in, not so much.
Oh, yeah, we're horrible at that.
You had three primary questions that you asked yourself, and I had to write them down too. One of the first ones was, what if I'd done something differently? Would Danny Oliver still be alive? And the second one was there something I missed to indicate basically what was to come? And the third one was, why did I live and why did Danny Oliver die? And those are primary fundamental questions that even though they're the crux of the biscuit, so to speak, did you get an answer, Scott Brown?
To the answer of, could I have done something different? No. Not as a, with my training and my experience and without knowing the future, no, there's nothing I could have done differently. The one that eats me up actually almost more is the stuff he did after Danny. And still I've come to, grips with it, come to, a realization with it. But, I still, every once in a while I ask that question. Had I stayed in the fight, would I have been able to take him out instead of taking cover? Would I have been able to stop him from all this shit that he did afterwards? Right. And you can't second guess yourself. You can't question it. I did what I had to do at the time. And, do I regret the fact that my wife still has a husband and my kids still have a dad? No, not at all.
No.
And if that's, and to, why was I saved and Danny was killed? No, I don't have an answer for that. And I won't until I go meet the Lord.
Yep.
And I've said there's, if the only reason I was saved was to be a good dad to my kids and a good husband to my wife and raise 3 good men, because Lord knows this world needs good men, then that's good enough for me. But I feel like it's that plus this book plus trying to help other law enforcement officers through their trauma. I mean, since then, I've joined our peer support team. I've started speaking with an organization called COPS, which is a national organization that deals solely with line of duty deaths, and had some amazing conversations. And even just all our local ones that have happened since Danny, because we had a shared experience, I've been able to talk to guys that probably wouldn't have talked to me otherwise because they knew I would understand. And I whether the Lord still has more for me down the road, some big thing, I don't know, but I'm going to continue to say yes to whatever it is. If this is as far as it goes, then I'm okay with that too. Right.
Let me ask you a kind of I don't know, maybe a little bit of a strange question. Absent this, what occurred, do you think perhaps you would have reached that level of introspection or self-examination that you otherwise took with that journey, good or bad?
No, I don't.
I didn't think so.
No, I and again, it goes back on my faith. And if you look at the Bible, every major character in the Bible went through something usually horrible to reveal something in them, trial by fire, that kind of thing. And, would I change what happened that day? Yes, I would, for anything in the world, but that's not how it works. And I can't do that. Right. So I'm going to try to do what I can with what happened and whatever Satan meant for evil, the Lord will turn for good. Right. And that's kind of the motto that Liz and I have been living by is this thing was meant for evil, right? This is evil. This was an evil day. And there's no, you can try to justify it. You can try to find a reasoning for it, and you're never going to find it. But it's what you do with it afterwards. And we are trying to do the best we can, and we've messed up and we ticked some people off. But you know what? We're trying to do the best we can with what we got, trying to help as many people as we can. Cause I feel like if I just sit on this and I don't do anything, not only did Danny die in vain, but I'm doing him a huge disservice and dishonoring his memory and myself and my family and everything else by just sitting there and not doing anything and stewing in it, as opposed to, you know what? He was about helping people. That was kind of the big goal of the POP team, was a community oriented type thing. I'm going to go out and try to help as many people as I can, and if it means I have to relive this story, then so be it.
This is a little similar, and I'm a little hesitant to mention this, but that's a drive that you have to do that. My drive at the time in '98 was when Deputy Sandy Larson was killed. We got an EVOC program, and my drive for designing the program was, it would have been ridiculously futile to have let her life be for nothing, especially if we didn't learn something from it. That's the goal. I'd like to go into lessons that you may have learned from all of this. But now we're going to get to the point where I said at the beginning, before we began and we were speaking, I said I'm not even going to open the book because I wrote it down here in front of me. Why should I open the book when it's right there? To me, the whole thing of this book got distilled down to 5 sentences. And it's about forgiveness. And it's something that I have a really difficult time with. Guilty. Very difficult. But these sentences at the end of the book just cemented, I'm trying to think of the perfect word and I'm not coming up with it, cemented the whole book for me. And you said this during your victim impact statement on April 25th of 2018. And you said, "My faith tells me to forgive the defendant. For the longest time I struggled with this. How do I forgive him?" This is the clue. I came to realize that I wasn't forgiving him or his actions. I was giving myself permission to not think about him anymore. That just resonated. To me, that was key.
Yeah.
That's powerful, powerful stuff.
Yeah, and I did not come by that easily. And actually, it took actually a pastor from my church to explain it to me, because my definition of forgiveness was what I wrote in there. Forgiving him, forgiving his actions, and there was no way that was going to happen.
Yeah,
and I know I was supposed to, as a Christian, I'm supposed to forgive and all that other good stuff. And I battled with that. I knew I could not forgive him for that, for not only what he did to me and my family, but more importantly, Danny and Mike and everybody. That rock in the pond thing. I mean, this was a boulder this was a mountain in the pond kind of thing, right? And the ripple effect is still, every once in a while, I have people that I had no clue. We did a book signing and somebody came up and talked to me and, laid out their heart to him, and I would have never even thought, right? But eventually, the way once it was explained to me, in that way, that I'm forgiving not him, but forgiving myself, honestly, because that was really what I was battling with. I could not forgive myself for what I was believing was my fault, and what I should have done and could have done, and what ifs and all the other stuff that we go over. And, it wasn't like a magic, like all of a sudden it happened at once just because he explained it to me. But once I was able to wrap my head around that definition of forgiveness, things started to get better.
This will affect everybody differently. For me, just as an individual, that was my revelation for that book. I'd never even thought about that. And forgiveness for an animal like this, my first inclination was, and probably always will be, no. How could I? And then I would think, but that makes me a bad person, until I read that, and finally the clouds parted. So, if nothing else, the little fat dumpy old guy right here got it. I got it out of that. So in terms of lessons, are there any lessons yet unmentioned that you think you've pulled out of this pile of debris?
I mean, the list is, it's long. There's, like I said, I would change that day, but I would also, some of the experiences that I've had since then, I would have never had any other way. Some of the friendships I have now, there's no way I would have had them. I mean, I'm good friends now with Mike's brother. And I mean, we're both law enforcement, but I don't think I would have really met him, different agencies, and now we're friends. I got to walk Danny's daughter partway down the aisle when she got married.
How cool
and hand her off to Susan. And
I'd have way cool.
I'd have been at the wedding, and I would given anything to, be there watching instead of doing it myself. But it was an honor to do something like that. The conversations just from this book alone, or when my wife and I go speak at these conferences, the conversations I've had with complete strangers, because something I said resonated with them, it just, it's filled. It gives me inspiration to keep going. But as far as lessons, don't take anything for granted. I know it's cliche, right? People say, oh, you never realize, how important things are until you come close to death. Well, it's true.
Yeah.
There's a reason people say it. My family, my time with my kids, instead of, hey, there's an overtime shift available. Sorry. I'd rather go spend a day with my boys fishing as opposed to,
priorities.
And yeah, I'm not saying money's not important and I don't need it. Right. But frankly, if I have a choice, it's going to be family over work. And I still like my job. It's not like I'm miserable where I'm at or anything like that. But I pick, family over that. And even my faith has changed dramatically. One of our pastors one time was given a sermon, and he referred to Christians in kind of two different contexts, right? He said there's little C, they go through the motions, they go to church, and they
right.
Throw something in the bucket once in a while and show up at Easter and Christmas, and I act right and that kind of thing. And then there's the big C, right, where you're out there trying to change the world, trying to spread your faith, not afraid to talk about it. And all of a sudden, I realized that I might not have tomorrow to get right, to do what I need to do, and to spread the word, to change somebody's life, to, talk to a friend that might not believe, right? And I don't want to wait. I don't want to have any regrets. I don't want to think, oh, well, I waited till tomorrow to talk to this person. Oh, wait, I didn't have till tomorrow, that kind of thing. Those are probably the big ones, is my faith and my family, just both of them complete 180s.
There was a musician that was one of my favorite individual musicians named Warren Zevon, who died from cancer. And on the David Letterman show, he talked about life just before he passed away. And he said 3 words: enjoy every sandwich.
Yeah, I like it.
Never forgot that. So your book, Scott Brown, basically began as therapy. And I'm guessing now that your book is sort of a vehicle or a conduit now for healing.
Yeah. I mean, it's, and that's, we tell people that get it, especially law enforcement officers. I'm like, hey, the first part's rough. I'm not going to lie to you, right? It's not a bedtime story. We had to start telling people, don't read it, because I started to read it at night by my bed and I was crying and I had to put it down. I'm like, don't read it at night before you go to bed. That's not a bedtime story, right? I'm all, but keep going, because we also talked to some people that are like, it was pretty intense and I'm halfway through. I'm all, you got to finish though, because that's why we label those chapters, right? The murder and mayhem and the aftermath, right? You got to keep going, because our goal was to not just set the stage, not just write an interesting story that people found, intriguing, because people like cop stories, right? We wanted to tell the story so that we could get to the healing afterwards, to hopefully inspire people to get healing for themselves. And so I'm like, you got to keep reading. You got to get to that last part, because that was my favorite part, was actually the third part of the book. Because that's the part that I want to get out. That's the part I want people to read. You got to get through the front part to kind of set the stage, but that aftermath part, that's where the real, I think, the meat of the book is.
I would completely concur. And again, we mentioned this, or you maybe mentioned it during the show. You said somebody read it and said, oh, they went through it in 2 days. But yeah, it's an easy read. It's disturbing.
Well, I wrote it, so it had to be pretty easy, right? If I actually did the whole thing, there would have been crayons and coloring pictures and stuff. Lucky Vicky knows what to do, so she made it actually look like a book for me.
Crayons, me and Jim Lister.
Yeah,
that's a story for another day. In any event, the event itself, the journey, the end is the goal. That's the point of it all.
And although there has to be an end to a book, right? The end of my healing, the end of this journey is still ongoing. It's not like there's still days. I still have bad days like everybody else, right? And I think I was telling you ahead of time, there's still not a day goes by that I don't think about Danny or that day.
Yep.
And sometimes I still mourn for the loss of what could have been. What kind of friendship would we have now? He would have retired by now, and
yep.
probably been giving me crap because he'd invited me to stuff I can't go to, right? Like some of my other retired friends. Hey, you want to go to this? I got to go to work.
I got to work.
Sucker. That kind of thing. The mourn the loss for Susan, for his daughters, for a whole bunch, the department, the good he could have done for those next 3.5 years or whatever it was before it's about 3 years roughly before he was going to retire. I don't dwell on him anymore. And I look forward to what's going to happen down the road. So I still have my bad days. I still go to therapy. My wife and I go check in with our therapist, who we love. We think she's amazing, and we go check in with her probably not as often as we used to, but once every couple of months. We're like, hey, can we do a checkup? And we go in together and just make sure that we're still, on the same page and thinking the right stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Scott Brown, let me wrap up because I'm looking at the time.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't address this. I do on the show every now and then, probably not as much as I should. Overall, in all of this, how has your faith been impacted?
It's been taken to the next level. Before I was raised in the church. I was raised going to church. My mom's a PK, preacher's kid.
PK.
Yeah. My dad, grew up in Episcopalian church, with all the incense and that kind of thing. And just it was always part of my life. But I was, again, for the most part, just going through the motions. And you would have never seen me pray in front of a group, volunteer, lead anything. Since this has happened, I was, a co-leader of a men's group with 75 guys, praying in front of them at the beginning of these services, talking openly about my faith with pretty much whoever would listen. We didn't make this a religious book, but because it was such a part of our healing, it's in there, and I wasn't trying to hide it. When we were working on publishing and stuff like that, it's like, okay, if we go with a Christian publication, we'd have to edit a whole bunch of stuff out, and I wasn't about to do that because that's not the point of this, right? We couldn't get a regular publication to do it because at the time, and still, we weren't exactly a popular group.
Persona non grata.
Yeah,
yes.
and a lot of the publishing houses they didn't want to have anything to do with it. And so we're like, you know what? Let's just do it ourselves. No big deal. But yeah, my faith and just I can't even really put it into words. How much of a turnaround, it wasn't like I was, going down, doing bad stuff and being a horrible person, but, the fire that it changed and lit in me, tenfold, it's a new life for me in that regard.
Scott Brown, did I leave anything out that you wanted to talk about tonight?
Oh, I'm sure we could sit here for another 6 hours if we wanted to, but no, it's
any major big bullet point that you wanted to cover?
No, I think this was all. I think it was good. I just, like I said, I encourage people to get this book and then share it. Hand it off to somebody, that you think might need it. And when we first came out with it, we kind of did a little campaign of buy one for yourself, but buy one to donate to an officer. And so we had, we had 170 bought that people pay. They said, hey, give this to somebody, 170 plus books that, so when we come across an officer that's hurting or just one that we meet out on the street or whatever, we always keep a couple in our cars and stuff. And we're able to give that to them, as a gift, saying, hey, this is somebody bought this that they wanted us to gift to an officer and I want to gift it to you. So I encourage that as well, and that's about it. Yeah. And there was, this scratched the surface, but like you said, there's so much in there that we'd be here for a couple days at least.
That's the whole point of being here. Number one, Scott Brown, thank you ever so kindly for being here tonight and taking the time to discuss an event that basically had the ability to completely tear you apart, and yet you found the interior steel and the temper to heal. But that's, again, why I say read the book. You can find it on Amazon. You can go to Scott and Liz, his wife. They have a website, scottandlizbrown.com. scottandlizbrown.com. You can get the book there. You can get it through the Danny Oliver Foundation too, right?
Yes, our webpage as well.
All right. Highly recommended. Thank you ever so kindly for being here. That's 2 full hours. No break. Thank you, sir, for being here tonight.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely astounding. And folks, thank you for being here tonight.